Hello interwebs, welcome to Adamant IT. I've got a PC upgrade to do today. This is a customer build that has come in and they've got some new parts to put into it. And this is generally sort of a preparation for Windows 11 upgrade. So it's going to be a little bit incremental on this PC. We currently have a Ryzen 2700X and we're going to be upgrading it to a Ryzen 5800X along with a replacement motherboard, more RAM and more SSD storage. So no AM5 upgrade for this one. However, the actual process that we're going to be going through will be the same for sort of regardless of what hardware you're putting in. So even though this is going to be an incremental step up for this PC, the actual process would work for any upgrade that you're doing. And it should be a good case study for what you can do about your computer that feels mid to late life cycle and, you know, even if it's technically Windows 11 ready, doesn't feel like it's Windows 11 ready. This specific one, I think the 2700X is Windows 11 compatible. However, the 5800X is going to be a lot faster. It's 2 generations of uplift, which is worth a lot with the Ryzen series of CPUs. And 5800X is a great gaming CPU. It's also going to get an upgrade from 16 gigs of RAM to 32 gigs of RAM. And the motherboard is a really nice example as well. So I'll just quickly show you those upgrade parts. We've got a 3600 32 gig kit of Corsair memory, basically what's already in there, but 32 gigs instead of 16. We've got a 4 terabyte Samsung 990 Evo Plus to add in there. So at the moment, the bulk storage is a 3 terabyte hard drive and it's got 1 terabyte SSD. So there's not enough room to have all the games on the SSD, and that makes a huge difference these days. So swapping out that hard drive for a nice big NVMe drive, that's going to make a massive difference to game load times specifically, but also to just performance for certain games when they're streaming assets. And then finally, the motherboard that's going in is we've got an ROG Crosshair 8 here. So this is the X570 Crosshair. The board that's in there is an X470 Strix, which would take the CPU upgrade without blinking, but this Crosshair motherboard is a really nice X570 motherboard. This is sort of, it's not the king of X570, however, it's a really nice X570 motherboard. So this is going to be a really nice upgrade as a final endgame AM4 system kind of thing. The only way up from here would be a 5800X 3D, but those are kind of expensive, and when you've got hand-me-down parts, this is still a really cost-effective upgrade. So let's roll the intro and we'll take a look inside the PC. So inside here we've got an NZXT 240mm AIO cooler up the top. So we'll have to remove all of this to get the motherboard out. The graphics card, that is the Asus TUF RTX 3070 Ti, which is a little bit unfortunate. It should be a nice graphics card, but the 3070 series is hamstrung by only being 8GB graphics cards. And that's a real shame because 8 gigs just doesn't do very well these days. It's still perfectly viable, it's just not as good as it should be by a long shot. It will survive for 1080p, but it's a bummer because this graphics card is fast enough for 1440p gaming, but it will just struggle if you go to the high resolutions, which is a bit unfortunate. Still worthwhile though, but that would be the next upgrade down the pipeline. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of this out and move stuff over to the new motherboard. And by move stuff over, I mean just the NVMe drive, which should be in here. And then in addition to that, we're going to shuffle some data around. Windows is already on the NVMe SSD. And so we're going to move that across and use the 4 terabyte drive as data storage. So we don't have to move Windows. However, for this video, I also want to demonstrate how you would go about moving Windows around and how you would go about doing BIOS updates and stuff like that if your motherboard isn't being changed. So let's start out by stripping this PC down, getting all the parts out of it and just dusting everything out that is staying in there. Let go, let go. All right. There we go. There's our X470 Strix. I'll just quickly remove the SSD out of this. The CPU and RAM are getting changed, so I'll just leave them in there. In all probability, this platform could be resold and put in a second-hand machine again. No. Give me the thermal pad. Come on. Oh, it's... heck. See if we can coax this off. There we go. Right, and that is a WD Black SN750. It's a nice SSD as well, so that will be perfectly suited for Windows. All right, put this back on here. Thermal pads can get a little bit manky over time. They kind of ooze out a little bit of oil, but like, that's fine. These things are not rocket science, so like, even though they're a little bit manky, you can still reuse them just fine. I will just get a little bit of tissue and just wipe that down just to tidy it up a little bit. That way the next person to fit something to this board doesn't have to just take that off and go, ew! I mean, there will still slightly, but... there's been a token gesture effort to tidy that up. And finally, I'm going to need these mounts for the AIO, so we'll steal these as well. Alright, now I'm going to take this chassis out the back and I'm just going to blow out all of the fans and vents with my air duster, which isn't going to get rid of all the dust, but it will just get the worst of it off, and then we're going to get a damp cloth and just wipe down all the surfaces to get rid of the rest of the dust. And that should just really bring this up nice and shiny again. So I'll see you guys in a mo. Right. Here is our new old board. This guy's seen some use. We've got some smoker's dust on the PCH fan there, so we'll clean that up at the same time, because we'll be taking this off to put the SSD in. So let's take that off. Then we're also going to take off the AMD brackets there to put on the NZXT bolts. Right, that's just going to want some toothbrushing, so let's grab a toothbrush and I'll just give that a scrub. There we go. Not hugely blocked, but now it's a bit nicer. And I'm just going to wipe down the whole board with some glass cleaner, just to take all of the just fingerprints and just smudges and stuff like that off of it. I'll spray the glass cleaner directly onto this cloth and we'll just wipe that down. Glass cleaner is safe to use on circuit boards. It is basically non-conductive. You don't want to drown circuit boards in glass cleaner because it doesn't evaporate very quickly. However, it won't damage them, so just as long as everything is dried out, it'll be completely fine. There we go. And I don't know how well that comes across on camera, but that's just brought back That's just brought back the plastics nicely. So these look like they're new again now, instead of having just a faint coat of just dust on them, which just makes things look aged. So now we can take these guys off. Oh, oof. Oh, nope, big screwdriver. Wow, those were mercilessly tight. And I'm going to transfer these brackets directly back to the old board. Whoop. We don't need to swap the back plates over, but it just happened to stay behind. And I'm doing this just so the next person that gets this board, there will be some brackets there, because we don't need them on the new one. I don't think anyone is actually using these brackets right now. So whoever uses this board will almost certainly take them off again for whatever cooler they're fitting, but you never know. So if we were upgrading this thing to current generation stuff, like AM5 for a Ryzen 7000 or 9000 series CPU, my recommendations would be, I would be looking at a B650 chipset. That's currently the price sweet spot. So you'd be looking for a B650 motherboard. That would have an AM5 socket, so you'd want to put in, and Ryzen 7000 is kind of the best bang for buck at the moment. You could either, for the cheapest possible AM5 chipset, you'd go B650 motherboard with a Ryzen 7500F from AliExpress. That will get you a very cheap motherboard and CPU combo that gets you onto AM5 with DDR5. And then into that, you would want to get a 32 gigabyte DDR5 6000 mega transfer CL30 kit, which is the sort of memory price to performance sweet spot for AM5. And the procedure that we're going through where we're swapping these motherboards will be exactly the same. While we're here, actually, I should just quickly take this chip out and just check there's nothing screamingly wrong with it. Nope, that's fine. There's no missing pins or anything like that. Cool. So then we can put in our RAM thusly. Right, this motherboard is built up and ready to go in. So let's drop this into the PC, and then we should be ready to switch this on, and we can start talking about software. Let's get our radiator fitted. So for this, I'm going to make sure that all of the cables are where they need to be, which they are. And there's two ways around you can top mount a radiator. You can go fans, radiator, top of case, or you can go radiator, fans, top of case. Now, putting the fans between the radiator and the top of the case is a bit trickier to fit. And it also means you've got to take the radiator off to do sort of cleaning. But I think it gives a cleaner look, personally. I think it looks a lot nicer. That's how it was already set up on this PC, and so that's how I'm going to set it up again. So let's put those in, and you kind of have to hold everything in alignment while you put the screws in. So it's a little bit awkward, but I think you get a cleaner finish. Although that much being said, if you're trying to reduce the bulk in the case, having the fans underneath the radiator will look smaller. The thickness is obviously the same, but the fans are less blocky, so it will appear to take up less space. So make of that what you will. But I prefer seeing the raw fins of the radiator to the backs of the fans, so whatever. Although, of course, if you've got RGB fans, you'll probably want those on show. So, yeah. You do you, boo. So we'll get one of those lined up and pilot the screw. And then without tightening it, I'll put in the opposite screw. There we go. Now the radiator is held in place. Now I've just got to locate the other fan. And I'm going to try and make that roughly centered. It doesn't super matter where it is, so I'm just going to go dead center. And for these thumb screws, we're just going to take them down to the stops. So just going to screw it up until the screw stops turning. We don't need to graunch this tight. That doesn't improve anything in a meaningful way. You just need to take it down to the stopping point. There's our wiring harness and the USB cable. And just wipe the top of that so we get that nice mirror finish. This is I think this is a Kraken X63, unless I'm mistaken. I used to have one of these. And it's getting on, but they still look really nice, these. I think they've aged really well. The infinite mirror face that you get on these still looks nice. You get a really cool light ring effect on it, and it just has a nice soft glow that I think just looks very pretty. Right, just put that the right way up. There we go, that looks pretty clean. Not a huge amount you can do with AIO hoses like this. They just kind of live there, really. If you wanted to, you could turn the radiator around 180 degrees so the pipes do a loop up to the back, but it just puts the bulk somewhere else. Yeah, I leave the choice to you. Graphics card's a little bit saggy. It would look nicer with just a little thing to prop it up. That's something to think about as well. However, for now, this thing should function just fine. Right, let's turn it on and make sure it posts, and then we can move on to software. Cool, so we have detected our motherboard, obviously. We've got a 5800X, and we've got our 32 gigs of RAM. It looks like we're running at 3400 at the moment. Has this been... We're on DOCP. Looks like we've got some old settings here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to reset to defaults. Let's load optimize defaults. And I'm just going to reboot again, because it looks like we've got some old settings dialed into this thing. Luckily, those old settings were for a slower kit of memory. Otherwise, we might have had trouble getting it to post there. So if you're using a second-hand motherboard, there's probably mileage in just doing a BIOS reset. We were able to just load defaults there, but otherwise just pop the BIOS battery out, wait 30 seconds, put it back in again, and that'll probably get you posting. Okay, so there we go. So we're back to auto settings. So we're going to want to switch on DOCP, which will give us the XMP profile for this AM4 CPU. Asus call it DOCP. Other brands have different names for it. It's basically using the Intel XMP profile for AMD CPUs. On AM5, we have Expo, which is AMD specific profiles. But we'll leave these on the auto settings for the time being. We'll do that last of all. So what BIOS version are we running at the moment? It looks like we have we've got a March 24 BIOS on this, so it's seen a BIOS update in its lifetime, but there'll be a newer one than that. Let's just check our settings. So we want to upgrade this to Windows 11, and we need to do one of two things for that. There'll be a BIOS update that is the Windows 11 BIOS update. Now, you don't need any specific features in the BIOS update. All the Windows 11 BIOS update does is change some of the defaults to switch on the existing things that Windows 11 needs. And the two big things for that are TPM. So over here under Advanced, under AMD FTPM, we want to make sure that firmware TPM is enabled, and that satisfies the TPM 2.0 requirement that Windows 11 needs. Firmware TPM is built into the CPU, so this is using stuff that is already in the CPU, and this is where the CPU requirements for Windows 11 come from, is basically Intel 8th Gen onwards has Intel PPT, which is effectively a firmware TPM, and AMD, I think it is Zen Plus, which is Ryzen 2000 onwards, has firmware TPM. However, for Ryzens, you've got to watch out because some of them don't have it. For example, the AMD APUs, that's NEG SKU. So for example, a Ryzen 2400G, even though it's a 2000 series, it's actually Zen 1. So that does not have FTPM. So that's where the gotchas come from. So yeah, 2000 series is a bit sort of how you're doing. However, Ryzen 3000 onwards, any of the 3000 series is a sure thing. The 2000 series is you should check. So we need that turned on. We also need to make sure that we have SecureBoot. So SecureBoot is currently enabled. And in addition to that, we need to make sure that CSM is disabled. And I'm fairly certain you have to disable CSM in order to have SecureBoot turned on. So these are the settings that the Windows 11 BIOS update will actually set up for you. So there's two things you can do. You can either change these yourself or do a BIOS update. Now, the customer's Windows installation on this is probably already a UEFI install of Windows, but I'm going to rig this with a CSM install of Windows to emulate someone who is having problems with SecureBoot and GPT partition tables, which is becoming a major thing because a lot of the anti-cheat software now, looking at you Battlefield 6, has made this a requirement. And while you shouldn't have a CSM install of Windows, that's ancient stuff. There's no reason why any current computer should have a CSM install of Windows. Yet it does happen. There are computer shops out there that just haven't updated their Windows installers in years, or they've made them incorrectly, or just home builders have also just either made their installer incorrectly, or they just accidentally did a CSM install because they didn't understand the difference. So we're going to go through the conversion process to make sure that if you do have an old install of Windows, here is how you're going to get it up to scratch. Let's get our updated BIOS. So this is a Crosshair 8. That's V678 X570. Let's see if that brings it up. That'll do. Crosshair 8 Hero. And I'll go to Support, Driver and Tools, BIOS and Firmware. And our latest BIOS is end of September. Nice. Let's download that. And I'll go into the zip file we've downloaded. Now there's this BIOS Renamer app, and this will automatically rename the file to one that is compatible with BIOS Flashback. This is what you would use if you are recovering the motherboard from a brick state or doing a CPU-less flash or something like that. We're not in a brick state, so we don't care about any of that. We just want this cap file. So I'm going to copy that to a flash drive that I've plugged in. The flash drive can be NTFS. Basically, all modern motherboards are completely fine with NTFS. You generally have to go back to older stuff before that turns into an issue, but anything X570 onwards is not going to have an issue with an NTFS flash drive. Right, now I've plugged the USB drive into a USB port on the back, and we've gone back into BIOS. And now I'm going to go over to the Tools menu here, and we're going to do ASUS Easy Flash 3. And there's our BIOS file. Please back up your BitLocker recovery key. So if you have BitLocker turned on, either turn it off or make sure you know your recovery key. There we go. So it's verified that we are going to get this BIOS file that we have downloaded. It's the newer version. We're on 1408 and we're going to go up to 5201. So if the BIOS file is wrong or corrupted, it will tell us. Modern motherboards aren't stupid and they will check the file before they try and flash it. The biggest danger to flashing a BIOS these days really is just power outages. So if you are in an area where power is spotty, then I don't know, do what you can, see if you can borrow a UPS, or failing that, pick a time when you know the power is more likely to be stable. Right, let's hit yes, and off it goes, processing our BIOS update. Right, one BIOS update later, and we are now on the latest version of the BIOS for this board. And once again, if we go over to our settings, we can see that FTPM is disabled by default, and also we are in UEFI by default, so CSM is disabled. And we will also find that SecureBoot is enabled. So again, these are the default settings for a Windows 11 compatible BIOS. Right, let's take a look at our Windows install. Oh, actually, this might be perfect because it's not booting from the customer's SSD. I kind of assumed that they would have a EFI install, but actually I don't think they do. And this is exactly the example that I was hoping for. This Windows install has probably been upgraded a couple of times from an older iteration of the PC and has just never been converted to UEFI boot. So firstly, let's just actually confirm if we have a legacy install of Windows or a CSM install. So I'm going to enable CSM mode, and let's just change this to legacy only. So now the computer will only try and start from legacy. So we'll save that. Yes, there we go. Okay, so yeah, this is ideal. We've got a legacy install of Windows 10. Now at this point, we could just leave it in CSM boot, but that's exactly the problem that people are having now with games like Battlefield 6. So what this means is that in CSM mode, you could install either a virus or a cheat or some other kind of malware that boots before Windows and injects itself into Windows as a driver at the kernel level. And what this would allow it to do is it would allow this virus or cheat software to pretend to be part of Windows, rendering it completely undetectable. And this is how you run. This is how you would run cheats in a game that has anti-cheat, or one of the ways anyway. Now with SecureBoot, you can only boot from a certified boot source that Microsoft or a handful of other companies has approved. But the problem is that you cannot run SecureBoot in CSM mode. So while the computer now boots up and we're booting into Windows again, we don't have SecureBoot, which means you're going to have problems with games like Battlefield 6. And I think Easy Anti-Cheat isn't far behind this. It's a matter of time before Easy Anti-Cheat, which covers a lot of other games, also says you must have SecureBoot. So firstly, you're going to need a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 boot drive. Doesn't matter which. We're using a Windows 11 boot drive because we're going to update anyway. So you can make one of these by downloading the Windows Media Creation tool. Just Google search download Windows 11 and pick the Microsoft option. So I'll put this flash drive in, and I'm just going to hit reset, and we're going to spam the delete key. And firstly, we're going to go back into UEFI boot. So let's disable CSM. Yeah, that's a warning message saying your computer might stop booting. And I'm just going to make sure that SecureBoot is turned back on again. Yeah, we're going to be in SecureBoot with Windows UEFI mode. Right, let's save and exit that. And then I'm going to go directly back into BIOS again and then boot from my flash drive. So back over to the boot menu. And as you can see, our only valid source now is my flash drive. So let's just boot from that. There are multiple ways of fixing this problem. We could take the Windows drive out, put it in another computer and fix it there. We could use certain partitioning tools like ESUS, have automatic tools for fixing this. You could also use a PE bootable drive. There are all kinds of ways of solving this. I'm doing it using a Windows 11 installer drive because I feel like that is the easiest tool that most people are most likely to have. If you're doing a Windows 11 upgrade, you're going to want to have this drive set up anyway. So it doesn't require any exotic tools that you might not already have. So from the setup menu, I'm going to press Shift F10 to get a command prompt. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use a program called MBR2GPT. So we're going to convert a master boot record partition drive to a GPT partition drive. And this basically converts it from a CSM boot into a UEFI boot. I'm not going to try and explain what MBR is to CSM versus what GPT is to UEFI because I don't really understand it well enough off the top of my head. It's just MBR is used with a CSM boot, GPT is used with a UEFI boot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a /? just to get the options up. So we're going to want to validate the drive, but also we need to know which drive it is we're converting because we've got a SSD and a hard drive in here right now. So I'm going to go into disk part and I'm going to do list disk. And we can see that disk 0 is 3 terabytes. So there's our hard drive. And then disk 1, that's our SSD. And as you can see, it's not GPT partitioned. Interestingly, the hard drive is. So I'm not sure why the hard drive is GPT formatted, but the SSD isn't. Perhaps the hard drive has been reformatted more recently, so it got updated. Whatever. Anyway, the important thing is disk 1 is the one we want to convert. So let's exit out of this. Okay, so from here we're going to do MBR to GPT, and I'm going to validate disk 1. All right, let's see. So attempting to validate, retrieve layout, validation completed successfully. So what this means is that if we attempt to convert this disk, it's probably going to work. So quick disclaimer, you should back up all of your data before you do this. I have backed up this data. So let's do MBR to GPT, convert disk 1. There we go. And now it's going to automatically reshuffle the partitions to create the GPT system partitions. There we go, that is all done. And again, notice the last thing it says here, before the system can boot properly, you need to switch the firmware to boot to UEFI mode. So again, it's giving us another friendly reminder that if we're in CSM boot, we need to switch to UEFI boot. We're already in UEFI boot right now, so this isn't a problem. So let's just do exit. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the flash drive and hit the reset button. And one last time, because we're in UEFI boot, if that has worked, the system will now boot back into Windows. And there we have it. So we've now converted this from a legacy boot to a UEFI boot. And what this means is that now Windows has SecureBoot enabled, so it's not going to have any issues with anti-cheat and that kind of thing. So the last piece of the puzzle now is just to get it updated to Windows 11. I've just turned off the desktop icons for the sake of privacy. I'll plug in the USB Windows 11 installer again. And I'm just going to run setup.exe directly off of the flash drive. Now, because this computer is now eligible for the Windows 11 upgrade, because it's now hardware eligible, we could do this through Windows Update. We could go to Windows Update and just say, yes, I want the Windows 11 update. However, doing with the Windows 11 update through Windows Update is horrendously slow. I do not know why. Windows Update is very slow to download. For some reason or other, it seems to download it, unpack it into an installer, and then unpack that installer again. It just takes forever. So it's far faster to make a Windows 11 flash drive and run setup.exe from it. So from here, we'll just say yes, next. I also recommend doing this offline. So right now I don't have a network cable connected to the PC. We're not connected to the internet. This makes things faster again because setup will look for updates and that kind of thing. And by not having an internet connection, we're just skipping past all of those steps. We're just getting to the install. You can do all of your updates once you've done the install. So we're going to accept the terms. There we go. So we're going to upgrade to Windows 11 Home, and we're going to keep personal files and apps. Now, if you have a cross next to any of this where it says that you can't keep your personal files and apps, there are solutions to that problem, but they're outside the scope of this video. Most of the time, it means that your Windows 10 flash drive is in the wrong language. So for example, your flash drive might be in US English, where your install is in English International, or German, French, Italian, whatever. So if you have problems at this point with it retaining your personal files and apps, you probably need to remake your flash drive in the same language that your system is running. The easiest way to do that is to make the flash drive on the system, because that guarantees that it will select the correct language automatically. So let's hit install. So now we hit this full screen blue thing. So it will go through this one, then it will reboot to another spinner. Once it reboots to the black screen, at that point you can remove the flash drive. However, at this point, I would recommend not touching it and just leaving it to run. If you have an SSD on a modern system, this won't take very long. I'd allocate an hour for doing this, but realistically, this will probably take 15 minutes, 20 minutes tops off the top of my head. I usually walk away and do something else, which is exactly what I'm going to do now. See you after the cut. Between the restarts, I fitted the 4TB Samsung SSD here, so that's now in the computer, but before we use it, we've got to partition it. So I'm going to right-click on the Start menu and go to Disk Manager, Disk Management, and it's automatically going to pop up with the Initialize Disk wizard. If Disk Management launches and it detects a drive that is not initialized, it will automatically start the initialization process. So this will just take a moment. There we go. So there's the wizard. I'm just going to cancel this for a moment and show you how to get to this manually. So firstly, looking at disk management, you can see that we've got our C drive as disk 1 here. And as we discovered earlier on, we've got disk 0 is the hard drive. And then finally, disk 2, that's our 4TB NVMe. So we want to initialize this. So I'm going to right click on the disk and click initialize, and that'll just pop this window back up. And we're going to do GPT because that's the modern partition layout. And that is now initialized. So now we need to actually partition it. So I'll right click on this unallocated space and hit new simple volume. Next. So by default, it will select the maximum amount of space. If you wanted to do multiple partitions, you could specify the size of the first partition. But personally, I like to do single partition drives. So we'll just do next. So yeah, assign the next letter, fine, next. And format it to NTFS, that's fine. And I'm going to call this Samsung. And we're going to do a quick format, next, finish. All right, and this will just take a moment to just make that partition and format it. There we go, and there, now it's mounted as F. So far so good. So now our new drive is formatted and ready for use. It's currently allocated to F drive, and if you're thinking, that's a bit weird, what's going on there? Well, E has been taken up by this system reserved partition, and this doesn't need to be mounted. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is just unmount this just to get rid of it from Windows. We're not deleting this partition because the system is booting from it. However, what we're going to do is we're just going to remove the drive letter so it's not accessible from within Windows, because it doesn't need to be. There's no reason to have this partition mounted at all. So I'm just going to right click on this, change drive letter and paths, and remove that drive letter. So that gets rid of E, and now the letter E has now been freed up and we can assign the other drives to it. I'm going to swap these around in a moment in order to set the new SSD to be D drive, because we'll be taking out the hard drive from the computer. But we're going to move some data first. So let's have a look at what's actually on the hard drive. So looking at the contents of this, we've got a mixture of user data and system data. So firstly, these folders here are system data, and these are very difficult to move. Program files and program files x86, is there actually anything there? Modifiable Windows apps and nothing. Okay, there actually isn't anything in these, so I think we could probably get away with just not moving these folders at all. And in fact, I'm not going to. If you have program files installed there, such as other apps or games, my advice is just simply to reinstall those apps or games, re-download them if necessary, which is a bit of a chore, but I don't think you can effectively move program files around without a tremendous amount of ball ache. So just don't, basically. Delivery optimization, that is just a system folder. We don't need to do anything with that. We don't need to move it either. These ones here, Windows Apps, WP System, and WU Download Cache, these are to do with the Microsoft Store. And these folders are mega super turbo protected folders, so we are not going to attempt to try and move them. However, Microsoft Store apps can actually be moved. There is a mechanism for this. So let's just have a quick look to see if we can find anything that's in there. So to find out what these could be, I'm going to go to the Microsoft Store and click on Library, and we can just have a look through the App Store library here. So a lot of this stuff is going to be just Windows apps as well, but if there were any games that the customer has downloaded from the Microsoft Store, this is where we would see them. And there's a couple of apps here. We've got a couple of system apps installed, you know, like Aura Creator for the Asus RGB stuff, that kind of thing. However, having a look down here, I'm not seeing any big games. So, you know, I'm not seeing Call of Duty. I'm not seeing Sea of Thieves or something like that. So it looks like there might be a couple of system apps installed to D drive, but it doesn't look like there's anything big that would actually be a meaningful pain in the ass to download again. If there was, what we would do is we would go to Settings, Apps, and Installed Apps, and you would find it in the apps list here. So let's say, for example, this 8BitDo Ultimate Software X. If we click on this, we can actually move the software somewhere else. So if we select Move, we can now select what drive to move it to. So it's currently on C, but you could select to move it to another drive. So this is how we move Windows apps between drives. So you can only do this with Microsoft Store apps, and if it was a huge game that was like another 100 gigs to download, that's how you would move it without having to download it again. The problem is that it's not easy to see what is already downloaded. You kind of have to know what's there or go through all of your apps. Kind of a pain in the ass. Suffice to say, I'm not seeing enough here to make me feel like it's worth going through all of them, so I'm not going to. I will just simply advise the customer that some of the Microsoft Store apps may have been uninstalled and need to be downloaded again. You don't lose any user data from this, you've just got to download the app again, so it's not a big deal. So we've also got a Steam library here, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment, because the Steam library, we can manipulate this a lot, because Steam is really good for how much you can manipulate the Steam library. So let's start by moving the actual customer data. So I've got these three folders here, which are clearly just user data. So I'm just going to copy those, and I'm just going to paste them to the new SSD. Yeah, only a couple of gigs there, thankfully. Now this Steam library, this is a separate Steam library that's been made from Steam, and I'll show you how to make and move these in a moment. However, if we go into that, we can drill down into the common folder, and you can see that there's a bunch of Steam games downloaded here. So we want to move all of this, and I can actually just lift and move the entire Steam library folder. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste this onto the SSD as well. Right, now we've done this, we've basically got everything that we care about from the hard drive. I'm going to leave the rest of the data there. I'm not going to erase the drive for the time being, because you never know if there's any problems or not. My advice is never to erase any of your old drives for at least a week or two after you've moved off of them, just in case there's a disaster. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to disk management, and we're going to unmount the old drive. So this hard drive, I'm going to right click on this, change drive letter and paths, and just remove D. So we've unmounted D, and now the hard drive is ready to be removed from the computer, which I'm going to do on the next reboot. I'm actually going to physically take the drive out of the computer just because we're cleaning up. However, if you wanted to, you could just unplug the drive and leave it in there for safekeeping or something. And now we've done that, I want to set the SSD to be our new D drive. So I'm going to right click, change drive lettering paths, and I'm going to hit change. And now we can change this to D because D has been freed up. Steam just launched in the... Steam just finished updating in the background, which is nice. So now from this PC, we've got a nice clean layout here. We've got our main 1 terabyte C drive and our 4 terabyte SSD for games and stuff. And we've removed the old hard drive, and we've removed that system reserved partition, so that's not cluttering up this PC. Right, now as luck would have it, Steam has logged into the customer's account, which is very convenient for me because it means I can see all of their games, which is good. A lot of the time Steam will log you out if it's detected that you're in a different location and the hardware has changed. It's kind of luck of the draw. So now I'm going to go Steam and Settings, and I'm going to go to the storage option here. So now, because we're here, we can see what games are already installed on the PC. And under storage, we've got local C drive, and previously there would have been D drive here. However, because we've unmounted D drive, Steam has had a bit of a meltdown. It's like, is that an external drive? I don't know. So this will disappear in a minute because it's going to get removed. So we're going to add a drive again. And the only option is to add D drive, so we'll do add. And now we can select that. And now Steam has already detected that there is some data on that drive. It's already picked up the Steam library folder that was there. So that's ready to go. And I'm going to hit settings and make this the default location now. And now I'm also going to select this external drive, and then I'm just going to hit remove library. So this will just remove that external drive from Steam so it's not cluttering it up. So that's now done. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to move basically all of the customer's games onto their new games drive. So I'm going to do an example with a small one here. So let's just pick Wreckfest here. I'm not going to move all of these because like Darktide is hacking 80 gigabytes. I'm not moving that on video. It's going to take ages. So I'm going to select Wreckfest, and I'm going to move it to Samsung D. So we'll hit move. And that's now going to move all of the game data from C drive to D drive for us. So now that game has been moved, and if we go back to D drive, you can see that Wreckfest 2 is now stored on D drive. So you can rinse and repeat for other games, and likewise you can select games en masse if you want, but I'd be a bit careful about moving hundreds of gigs worth of games in one operation, because if the computer gets stuck or something like that, you might find yourself in a bit of a weird state. So I'd suggest doing it, you know, like a few tens of gigs at a time. If they're small games, then obviously you can bulk select a chunk of them. But big stuff like Darktide here at 80 gigabytes, move that guy on its own. So yeah. Anyway, so that's how you move stuff around between Steam. So at this point, we're now basically done. All I've got to do is power this system off, pull that hard drive out, and we're effectively done. So that's where I'm going to wrap this video up. So I hope that was kind of useful as a bit of a primer on how to approach giving a computer a sort of Windows 11 upgrade. So if you've got an older computer that's currently not eligible for Windows 11, or if you're just refreshing your system at the same time, this should give you a few ideas on what you can do in terms of upgrading your hardware, upgrading your Windows installation, doing any system conversions that you need to do, and then managing things after the fact. So as you can see, you can do it all without having to do like a complete teardown and start from scratch. This might also be a good opportunity to just reinstall Windows from scratch and get that clean slate. But for some people, that's a real pain in the ass, and you may just really not want to do that, which I totally get it. For me personally, reinstalling Windows on one of my computers is an all-day job because I've got a lot of setting up to do on those. So yeah. Anyway, hope that was helpful. Thanks for tuning in. See you all in the next video. Bye for now.